actually take advantage of what we've put together. So as Alyssa said, I'm Patti Carpenter. I'm the Global Trend Ambassador for Maison Objet. I'm going to talk really fast because we got a lot to cover, and I'm from New York. So if there's anything you don't understand or something you want me to slow down for, please just shout out or raise your hand or say something, because I'd love to have a creative conversation. This can be certainly a dialogue. If there's questions or observations that you have about some of what we're going to talk about, I'm certainly more than happy to hear it, because for me, that conversation and that exchange is really what happens in the world of design. What you're going to see today is the way that we distill this is the show is 5 days long. How many of you have actually been to Maison Objet? Great. So there's a lot of you that have not gone. So hopefully this will inspire you to want to come. It happens twice a year, and it's January, which is this one is going to be the reportage from the January 18 show, and it happens again in September. People often ask me what the difference is between the two shows, and is there one that you should attend versus another. A lot of it has to do with what your own particular reasons for going to the show are. But in January, it happens simultaneously with Deco Off, which is if you're into home textiles, then you got all of the showrooms in Paris are open for home textiles that you can also go and see. And in September, it happens simultaneously with Paris Design Week and Now Lay Off. And Now Lay Off is something that's also co-sponsored by Maison Objet, and that's young innovators, young designers. That's a separate space away from the show itself, which is, the show is out in Villepointe, just outside of Paris, at a huge campus that has 8 halls. So it's sort of arranged like a big hand with the halls coming off of it, and it is, you'll see some of the details there in a minute, so you'll see how large it is. And the Paris Design Week has all the showrooms in Paris are open, and lots of parties happen in the evening, and so you're moving through the streets of Paris, and it's a very convivial atmosphere at that time of year in Paris, and that's actually probably my favorite, just because you can really move around a great deal at that time as well. So depending on what you want to see. Also in January, for those of you who it's important to, the larger brands do their new introductions in January, so if you need to see those new introductions and to be on top of that, then that would be a good time for you as well. So you can sort of weigh those two things. Or if you're like me, try and go twice. So, without further ado, I also always talk about what my mindset is for this season and often the year. Last year we talked a lot about, or last season for September, we talked a lot about discovery. And now it's not just about, for me, discovering, but it's also about what you do with it after you discover it. So it's great, the idea that, you know, all things are kind of inspired by all other things, that's wonderful. But then what do you do with that inspiration? Where do you take it? What's the next step? How do you further engage with your customer, your consumer, your client, with that, with those things that you have now identified? So it's about thinking about how you're going to move things forward, and that's what we're focused on today. So here's sort of the overview of the details. 89,000 visitors this time. It's a huge show. We can't stress enough what you're missing if you're not there, because so much is going on. There's so much energy, there's so much camaraderie, there's so many conversations and conferences that are going on. We were up 4% over last January. 48% of these are international buyers. So that means that you're seeing people and interacting with people from all over the world. The French visitors were up 2%, but we were up 10%. And that's a big deal because the American market is really growing and continuing to boom in some way, and we really are seeing a lot more interaction. We saw 620 new brands. That means every time you come, you're discovering the new, the next, the now, what's not out there already, so that you're bringing something new and interesting to your clients. You're seeing over 1,000 French exhibitors and over 1,600 international exhibitors, and a total of 2,700 plus exhibitors throughout the 8 halls. You have 63 countries represented with product there. It's amazing, just the amount of sheer product that you're going to cross. And you're going to see over 3,000 brands. And this year we had 6 rising talents from Italy. Every edition we have 6 rising talents. In the January edition, they're international, and in the September edition, they are French. And we flipped that for our designer of the year, so you'll see that as we move through. So We also always have a trend forum. The trend forum is done in a rotation of 3 different people who curate it, and this year it was curated by Vincent Gregoire of the Nelly Rodi agency. How many of you all are familiar with Nelly Rodi? Okay, so they're a big French-based trend agency, and so he does this sort of every 3 shows as the rotation happens, and this year he called out showroom. And I was sort of confused by what that word meant. What did it mean to have a trend called showroom? But basically what he's telling us is that the consumer is now playing a huge part in the work that we're all doing as creatives and innovators, and that the consumer is acting in the part of the art director, the designer, the architect, the merchandiser, the visual communications experts. And so they are really the sales ambassadors for your brand. And so whatever you're doing, it's really continuing to be more and more strongly about consumer engagement. How are you bringing your customer, your client, to your brand and having them do some of that work of getting it out there? They become your showroom. So we always find an eye when I go through, so this is this season's eye in terms of what did we find at the market. We're going to divide it into 4 categories. First, we're going to talk about individual color. Then we're going to talk about color palettes, the way we see color working together. We're going to talk about print pattern and surface design, and we're going to talk about materials. So first, color. And the first one up is mint chip. The way that I do slides, for those of you that have not seen my presentations before, is I try to put an overview of all different types of products, different materials, and different uses of the color or the palette or the material, so that you can understand how we saw this around the entire show. It wasn't just showing up in one place. For me, that's not the trend if it's only in one area. It may be a trend to call out in an area, but when I start to see it have it coming through in all of these different ways is when I start to call it out as what's distilling for me is what to watch. So the first is mint chip. This is this sort of soft minty green. It's part of that whole pastel palette. It continues to be this wonderful sort of fresh, kind of almost like a spearmint. There's been, for me, I'm still talking a great deal about matte finishes. We still continue to see things coming through in matte versus shine. When there's shine, it's usually just a light luster. It's not a high shine. Continuing in that range, we continue to see pink. The pink is becoming warmer, blushier. It's this whole idea of reddening. We're seeing a whole warming trend in general for what's going on in the market. Lots of color having red added into it, yellow added into it to warm it up. From the macro trend side, we're talking about it from the point of view of global warming and climate change. And the fact that we've been so fixated on that, we see that sort of transitioning into colors that make us feel warmer, colors that make us feel cozy and comfortable. So here we have this beautiful blush. But notice all of the different types of products, even into tabletop and flatware, in terms of how that color came through. Then bluebells, also in this, continuing with these sort of soft shade of pastels, we're seeing this new blue that's a little bit more aqua. It's got a little bit of green in it. It's giving it that watery feel, because we are still talking about watery influences. Again, global warming, our focus on waters. I just got back from South Africa, where I do not understand how this happens, but a city that is on a coast of an ocean, Cape Town, is about to run out of water. In July, there will be no water. People are already on a 50 liter a day because of a drought amount of water that they can utilize, and they're sitting right there on the coast of an ocean. And the reason that I've been given as to why this happens is because they can't figure out how to do desalinization that doesn't cost an arm and a leg, so they can't take the ocean water and take the salt out of it. This is going to be happening constantly around the world. The world's waters are shrinking. So there's a lot of, in terms of macro trends, there's a lot of conversation about that. And that helps us sort of focus on these watery blues as they start to come through. But aren't they pretty? I mean, they really are just sort of engaging. You kind of go, ah, when you see that board, right? Because they really do sort of give you that sense of fresh. Next is smoked salmon. There's a lot on this side of the palette, these warmer, blushier tones, so you're going to see them sort of deepen through as I move. I couldn't not talk about any of them because they really were all quite prevalent, but in very different ways. So this is deeper than the blush. Again, more red, but you're starting to see it. I mean, that's a carpet. You've got lighting, the ubiquitous faux fur, which is still everywhere, but then in matte shades on chairs that can be indoor, outdoor. We're seeing a lot more knitting coming through, just as a note for those of you doing textiles, and then certainly the velvets, and even in a more casual version, like the lighting is very casual on both of these, which I thought was interesting, and that's a suede shade, which I thought was kind of nice. Then we go to praising purple. We've been talking about purple for a while from our Trendscope presentations, because I've been focused on purple. Europe has always has some purple. They tend to be a lot more comfortable with the color than we are, honestly. But when we have it, it tends to be on a blue cast. So we had called out Jacaranda 2 years ago, and then I was very happy because I'm also a Pantone Global Trend Ambassador that they called out ultraviolet this year. But who knows what color Hillary Clinton wore when she conceded?
White.
No. Purple. She wore purple, and that was calculated, because what is purple? A blend of, exactly, the blend of red and blue. It was about coming together. So those are those sort of macro trends that we pay attention to. So we've been talking about purple for a while. So for us, we see in the US it's going to come through pretty much more in this kind of permutation, which is more blue casted, because blue is the favorite color of the US by most people. And so that anything that has a blue cast, we tend to resonate with more. And so the bluer cast to purple, I think, is going to be stronger here. Coral Gables, again, watching those blushy tones deepen into this beautiful coral. We're seeing a lot of this kind of color coming through. We talked about it a couple years ago and called it cactus flower. But it is absolutely this reddened pink, this warmed color. It's one of these, we have a few of them that we call complex colors for complex times, where it's got so much of red and so much of pink in there that depending on your take on it, it could be a pinked orange or an oranged pink, you know. So it's that whole idea of this beautiful coral. But look how I love the way they sat it back against that bluebell color. Isn't that gorgeous? And even on the pillow, how the blue is pulled in. And then Oceanside. This is the color, I named it this because as a nod to Sherwin-Williams, because that's their color of the year this year, is this beautiful teal that they call Oceanside. It's a little greener than what I was seeing there, but you see how pretty this sort of level of teal is. It's a step up from the teals that we had a couple of years ago, where they got very dark and very blue and very dense. So they're lighter, they're a little fresher. I love the watercolor patterning to the pillow that you see there, but you see it in all kinds of materials, and that's one of the things that I think is quite interesting. So for home textiles, I would look at Oceanside. Then we deepen from that Coral Gable into Desert Sun. This is really a darker, redder, much warmer, we called it lava in terms of one of the colors that we talked about from ours, but it's really this very reddened to orange. So the orange is continuing, and it's just getting more and more red. It really feels like sort of that sunset on the desert. And then that unsweetened lemonade, that yellow is still continuing. I'm amazed at how long yellow has held on and still very white. But what's interesting is there's three colors that come through that are really sort of like the primaries. So here you see unsweetened lemonade. I even loved how they just shot it through in something as natural as this beautiful set of baskets. But you know, the whole idea that you've got a clock in it, that you've got glass in it, that you've got cookware in it, that's when you really sort of know that these colors are going to be around with us for a while. So you have the yellow, here's the blue. We called it Blue Ray. It's a little sharper, almost neon-y, a little more intense than what would be called an Yves Klein blue usually. It's a little more intense than that. I loved Mickey. There's this company always does characters, and they do them in great colors. This was one of those 620 new companies. They did these beautiful velvet pillows with all of his hand painting on velvet. They did a gorgeous job. And that one up on the top, that wing, is also theirs.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that gorgeous? Then we go to really red. So the three primaries really showed up. That bright, bright yellow, that really blue, you know, the blue is in Blue Ray, and the really red, that very intense, true primary red. And you see it in a lot of different materials. I want to call out this bench because you might have seen it in one of the other ones. I know it was in Mint Chip. That is by one of the other new companies that was there, and the top of that is the veneer, but thinner than a veneer of a birch tree. And they strip the tree, and then they weave it and sew it together. And so it's really like a textile more than it is like a wood. It's really beautiful. And they did lighting out of it, and they did seating out of it. But that's one of the other things that you discover is these young innovators who are using materials in new and different ways and thinking out of the box. Verdigris is where we see the green going. This really sort of right in the middle, very vegetal green. I've been likening it to succulents. that sense of that green that you think of when you think of a succulent plant. It's not quite the same as the leafier green on a flower. It has a little more depth, a little more density, and it's also kind of round, for lack of a better way to sort of describe the color. And if you even in the things we pulled to put this together, everything's got this sort of roundness to it, this density. And I want to call out this is a wonderful one of the other new companies, and that's EcoBirdie. And EcoBirdie, that's a storage little elephant for a children's room that's made from recycled plastic toys. All of their things are made from recycled toys. They make toys out of recycled toys. I just thought that was an incredible story. So there's those kinds of things that you're also sort of finding when you're going to this. Yeah, exactly. The little elephant, he's adorable. Then we go to Pinotage. This is sort of where we're starting to move into the darker colors. You see this really rich, again, that sort of, it's just tasty, it's succulent. You can put, you can almost taste that color. It's more involved than a berry for me. It's got, and again, notice the kinds of products that it's in. They're kind of a little edgy. That's wood. That's a wood sculpture that's been stained in that color. They did them in this color and an inky dark blue, and they're really wonderful. This is lighting. And this, I just wanted you to see how intense that is, because carpets are doing, this is a carpet, an excerpt from a carpet, and all of this density and tufting and really high pile is coming on very, very strongly. You're seeing a lot of levels and textures in carpets, and so I wanted to call that particular one out. And then this is where we see white going. There's something about white that's become luminous. It has a little bit of green or gray in it, but it's not that stark white that makes it feel sterile. It's very engaging, and I love the whole idea. This is, you're gonna see another shot later from the same company, but that's from a company called Sophie, and it's a Greek company that takes all of their very traditional statuary and makes it into this modern things for a new home, they say. And notice also that here's another carpet. Look at this pile, how it's cut and built up and mixing the silk and the wool. And this is a wall piece that's a shelf with all that carving in it. And then Tobacco Road, this is one of the newer neutrals we see coming through as we talk about the brown side of the palette becoming important after we have sort of this ubiquitous sea of gray. Then we really are sort of seeing this new level of browns coming. And I love the fact that you can kind of go green or red depending on your palette and what you're doing with it. But it's that sense of having that kind of flair one way or the other. And then Play with Clay. This is the other neutral that we see. It's not as dark as a traditional taupe. It's got a lot more pink in it. And it's really coming from a very sort of natural permutation. And we're seeing a lot more of this in tabletop where they have these organic edges and very interesting uses of glaze that bubble and crackle and give you that real sense of handmade. A lot of that is continuing. Also how beautiful it looks in bedding. And then this is one of my favorite things, brown sizing. I tickle myself with color names. But we've been talking about, since there's been this importance of metallics, and metallics are certainly going to be with us continuing on into who knows how long. One of the things that we're starting to see is what's happening with them. How are people coming up with new ones? And the touch of brown that's been added into this, it's no longer copper. It really is a brown metallic, and I really love that about it. And you can see it in all of these different materials, from leather to glass to, this is also glass, so like mercury glass. I love this tub in metal. Can you see the bunny rabbit there?
And your wristwatch.
Yeah, but mine's not quite as brown as theirs even, but almost. And now we go to palettes. So how we seeing color being used together. So the first is these freshwater pearls, how we're seeing these beautiful matte pales being used together. Again, carpet, look at that high-low. All that texture, it's amazing. But I really love the matte glazes, the dip look here, and the same thing here, and these are two different companies. And then that one over there is ceramic by a wonderful Italian woman who uses sort of like a corrugated paper to give that texture to all of her ceramics. They're really beautiful how it looks in the velvet. And then this beautiful carpet. And then we go to dry down. I couldn't quite come up with what it was about this color palette. I mean, I love the palette, but naming it was hard. It's kind of dusty. It has this very sort of matte chalky kind of look to the color, which I think makes it look very modern and very clean. But the other thing about it is there's a lot of use of these peach tones back against these teal colors that I've been seeing for a while now as a new palette of color, just pulling those together. It's actually not new, we're sort of circling back. It's a retro take on a color palette, but there's a lot of that I've been seeing, so I felt the need to call it out. And then the enamels, isn't that just a beautiful mid-range, mid-tone color? This is a lighting fixture. He calls them clouds. He was in the craft area. But you know, look at these beautiful birds. You're gonna see something on birds later, but that's carpet. And then these beautiful tables, different companies sort of doing these nesting tables and these sort of enamel kinds of pieces. And then spring buds is sort of where that next tier or next level up for the color goes. It gets slightly brighter in this range. And so you start to see, but there is still this matte sort of take on color. It's not high shine. Again, it's, you know, very casual fabrics. This whole range I thought was very interesting with all the way that they were doing all their tie-dyes. I mean, look how many colors they offer. Can you imagine what the SKUs are on that? But just sort of very interestingly done and almost up to neon. And then retro brights, whether it's the 50s, 60s, or 70s, people were sort of talking about color and looking back. But what I thought was very interesting in this range was that they had all of this sort of big, flat, cutout kind of patterning. Everybody using, or most of the people using this kind of palette, you saw these kinds of patterns come through. Yeah, almost. And then we did see some primaries, which I thought was sort of interesting. And this started last season, and I made one board, and I didn't feel strongly enough about it from September, but now I am starting to see more people working in just the three primary colors with maybe a shot, you know, of something else mixed in. But I love the idea of these very funny little lights with a color, each color in a different, you know, each part in a different color. And then the mod mood is sort of this Scandinavian take on color as we look we continue looking at mid-century modern, this kind of Scandinavian take on kind of retro looking color, maybe from the 70s, but we really saw a lot of that coming through. And most of these sort of have that feeling. These two were sort of taking it in different ways. This is a candle company called Baobab, whose candles I absolutely love, and they actually worked with the Ndebele this year, which is where I just came back from in South Africa, so there was this immediate resonance, but it is still in the basket weaving in the straw, this certain level of color for the candles. And then also how nice the patternings up here are really interesting in these colors for the tabletop, kind of like old Dansk. Ooh, I'm not moving. Technical assistance, por favor. I'm flashing, but it's not going. Oh, wait a minute, there we go, okay. Gone global. So this whole intrepid sort of color story. It's really sort of about picking color up as you move around the world and how you mix it together. And we saw a lot of this deep sort of pinotage color coming through, but popping it with these very sort of pale colors. So this whole down, you know, this whole lower part of the board is sort of the pales with that. And then up on the top, you start to see how it works back to sort of more spicy tones. But it really is that sense of sort of picking color up that kind of represents different parts of the world and mashing them together in a very interesting way. And then there's a ton of black and white. I mean, you can see how much is in here, and I edited this. There's a lot of black and white. I was surprised by how much black and white we saw. And the wonderful ways that people are doing it, so it can feel very modern, like they do here in stone, and that's all inlaid, so that's craftsmanship. To get that's not painted. It's beautiful. You know, how we see it in tabletop, in seating, isn't this amazing? Again, marquetry and stonework, that's craftsmanship. So we really are sort of seeing, we've been talking about it for a while, it's moved past that DIY kind of craftsmanship and really into high levels of craftsmanship skill in order to make them how you see it in tabletop, how you see it in sort of more casual, how you see it in textiles and fur. So it really was, there was a lot of black and white all over. And then Fire Next Time. This was this whole idea of this warm palette. I kept sort of seeing people utilizing these warm tones together and really felt like I had to call that out for you. So you can see it in a lot of home textiles, but even in lighting and in accessories. These are ceramic. That's that same woman that works with the the corrugated look, but those are all made out of ceramic. And then here are the three I wanted to call out. From Sophie, these are sort of these three new sort of metallic colors, and I love the idea that they have this sort of metal, this metallic finish, but that they're in these very sort of traditional forms. But aren't they pretty? Mm-hmm. They kind of go back to the freshwater pearls, but they were so special I wanted to call them out for you. Then we go to materials, and the first is cork. We've been looking at cork for a while, but now we're starting to see, as people look back and try to find things that are sustainable and interesting, they're starting to move more into design of them. So we're starting to see where they're manipulating it, so they're cutting into it. This is called 3D, the company's called 3D cork, and they really go through putting texture on it. The idea of coloring the cork, the idea of, sort of just doing, this is Tom Dixon, if you can imagine it. The idea of splattered paint put on it, or very simple modern sorts of structures for a desk set. But it's about utilizing this very simple material in much more modern ways. And then finally, feathered. There were a lot of feathers. I have been talking about feathers a while ago, and I thought I was beyond them, but there were so many that I really felt like I had to call them out. So lighting, moving across. What I did find was that the scale is getting bigger. They're really big now. This is a wonderful young designer who was over in the craft area, where she takes wire with her lighting and then mounts these individual feathers on, so very time consuming. These have been around for a while, but again, the scale keeps getting bigger and they're playing with more and more color. And then this is a young jewelry designer who's using actual feathers, and it's hard to see, but those are real feathers that have been screen printed that are just meant to be little sort of objet d'art that sit around on your table. And then top brass. This is certainly the metal of choice that we see everywhere. But what I loved was that people are doing more interesting things with it. So it sort of started off as just the brushed brass in very simple forms, and now it's starting to have patterning embossed in it. I love this whole chair, and the whole idea of the way that they put the wood together with the brass together with the suede for the seating, so that whole idea of mixed materials, which we've been talking about for a while. These two end tables, where they're encased in brass, but each of them has a different stone, and this is shagreen in the middle, so a stone, a shagreen, and a stone in terms of those. And those are attached to the table. Those are part of the table, those steps. And even the brass color and leather. And who doesn't want a nice stack of brass luggage instead of old leather suitcases? And then fiber. We've seen so much, again, as we talk about this idea of moving beyond the DIY and into really high craftsmanship, the amount of work that it takes to weave all of these, and these are each from different companies, is amazing when you think about how long it takes to make each of these, and the skill set. But isn't outdoor furniture going to be really beautiful? Mm-hmm. Look at this set with all of the structure. It's amazing. And then string fever. I was past this, but I continue to see all of this macrame. But what I found was interesting is we've started to blend macrame and string and fringe. So we're not necessarily weaving it to pattern, we're just using strings for lighting here. Here we've gotten much more involved, where you've got the macrame and the fringe. Here we're using leather on ceramics for this weaving, for patterning here. This is Hybrid. I don't know how many of you know that company that does those big pieces that look like animals that have shelving in them. It's a woman and her sister that have it, but this was their newest cabinet, where they have a fringe as the cover. The idea of moving it into seating, or simple structures like on the framework for the I just lost the word for this. Thank you, screen. But one of the things I am seeing a lot more of is screens. We saw a lot of screens this time around and last time, so I don't know if it's because people's spaces have been open and they're starting to section and cordon them off, but we're seeing a lot of really beautiful decorative screens. And then this tangled web, all this black mesh, this work with wire and mesh in the color black, I thought was very interesting. This is bigger than a human being. That's gorgeous. I can certainly see that in somebody's hospitality project. That's a really great lighting system. But these, which are done in wire, This which looks like someone took your fishnets and just put a light down inside. The fan effect here, which I thought was very nice in lighting. And then very simple structures here for the lantern outside, but also very beautiful complex structures, more formal. So it's just working with black mesh. And then Legman. This whole idea of sort of parts of and pieces of furniture that become the focal point. I love the little stool with just that one turned leg. The idea of capturing this almost like a facet for a jewel in this shagreen cabinet. These wonderful turned legs on this piece. This again, almost like the facet for the end table where it comes up and captures. These were really lovely, the way they sandwiched the leg in between the slits in the wood for that. So you can powder coat those in any color. And they had a range of a lot of colors. Or the really fat sort of turned legs, or just putting that little tip inside makes it almost look like a stiletto heel or something. And then this one, the way it sits on top as opposed to being captured by the leg in that way, I thought was really interesting. And now last but not least, we have print and pattern. So we're seeing still a continuation of indigo. The interesting thing though is that it's moved from being very dark, which is why I put this one here in the center, to most of it is coming through in that bluebell, in the lighter, more washed color. So it's either that they're not dipping it as many times or they're washing it down for that more casual feeling. And this one here is one of my favorites. This is from Japan. This is indigo tie-dyed leather. And it is stunning in person. The hand is beautiful. And then this also from Japan, this splattered glaze with 24 karat swash across the top in the porcelain was also quite wonderful. And then face it. I collect masks, so I'm always sort of tuned into faces, but I couldn't believe how much we want to look back at ourselves in some way, shape, or form. But there's a lot of faces out there, and in any kind that you might want. So you can go very brutalist in seating, or more, a little more modern, almost like what Jonathan Adler does with his multiple faces, and this is not Jonathan. The blown glass through the wire. These little sort of ring dishes and candle holders with all of these fun little faces mixed back with dots. Going more tribal here in the corner. These two are from the same manufacturer, but the lighting piece or the little dish piece that could be an ashtray. This is a mirror. And I loved this company, and I'm sorry I can't remember the name of it for you, but I will. Hopefully it'll come back to me. But this young lady is one of the 620 new, and those are all candles, but she also did tabletop as well. But each of those faces is inspired by a famous person. And so like one of them is the Marilyn, and one of them is the, something, and I can't remember what the name of her company is, but they're really quite fun. And then now we're going to go into this section that all deals with sort of nature. And if we're talking about sort of how we're moving forward and what looks new, florals are certainly already there. So what makes a new floral out of an old floral? We're starting to see lots of the stems and the stalks coming through, not just the buds, which is sort of what we tend to focus on usually, the tops of the flowers, but we're really starting to see sort of how the flower grows, really focusing in more on nature. And also not just sort of the typical flowers, not just a rose and a chrysanthemum and sort of the bigger things that we see all the time, but really sort of more sort of lesser known varieties, if you will. And then I just sort of called out a couple of things for those of you looking for more specific information. We saw a lot of bedding in these dense florals. So this idea of these really bigger blooms, the bold sizing, and then this density of overlaying those dense florals one on top of the other. And up here you're sort of seeing it in the more neutral colors that really sort of feel like nature. And then down here you're starting to see how they move into more decor all the way through to the burgundy and black here. And then we saw birds, lots and lots of birds. Another one that I had to really edit into. So here you've got carpet, seating, pillows, and even from Christian, Lacroix, part of his new collection, he did a whole focus on birds and butterflies, you'll see later, and he did lots of birds as just standalone imagery in ceramic, and beautifully painted. And one of the things I will call out is the birds are a little more realistic than they've been, so you're a lot of focus on plumage. So just as you think about working with them, think about that as well. And then full-on floral for the tabletop. Look at the scale of these blooms for table.
And these are two of my favorites. And again, notice how you're looking at the stem and the stalk. You're not looking down on the flower this way, you're looking up at the flower that way. So the perspective has changed a little bit. And then welcome to the jungle. We were in the tropics where we just saw beautiful little palms just kind of placed. And now we're in the dense middle of the jungle. Everything is very, very densely patterned, very thick, very lush, very mysterious, lots of them on dark grounds. And now that you're in the jungle, you're not just seeing the leaves, you're starting to see the birds, and you're starting to see the cactus, and you're starting to see the monkeys, and you're starting to see all of these different things that one finds when one ventures, again, looking deeper in. And I personally like them on the darker grounds. And then butterflies. As we start to get deeper into the jungle, we're starting to find, we're finding insects. The first one we saw a lot of, and I was sort of thinking we were over butterflies, but I don't think we are. There's really just so many of them. One of my favorites is, this is from Noman, the clock people, but isn't that a gorgeous piece of wood carved from one piece of wood as a hook? But in lighting, how they're floating off the edges. This is metal, and they print some of them to look very realistic, and then they carve, they cut them out and they sit away from the piece. This is from a Japanese tabletop manufacturer. Notice how they've popped some of them in black and white, and then others looking a little more realistic, but a really beautiful tabletop set. And then here where you're seeing them printed more realistically or creweled in a chain stitch there. And then this is a beautiful brocade that's done with I don't know if you can see him, but there's a big butterfly there. And then we go deeper. And this is for Garrett, wherever you are. The creepy crawlers. There are so many beetles and so many bugs. It was kind of creeping me out just to look at them and work on this slide, I'm telling you. And I mean, I don't know how many of you all follow fashion, but Alexander McQueen did the most extraordinary dresses this season with these wonderful encrusted beetles on them that are in those really sort of iridescent dark colors that feel like the iridescence of beetle wings and things, but they're really stunning. But there were just lots and lots of them everywhere. So from the very, very realistic, even to what's on your tabletop, most of them very realistic looking. This is wallpaper with the bugs mixed in. And then we spotted spots. Cheetahs and leopards were all over the place. So again, I sort of edited in. You had the more realistic ones and really nice faux furs. You had true taxidermy. You had ones that were sort of much more fun where they took the spots and put them into stripes. You had them coming through in ceramics. He's a vase. There is a shot I had of him with the flowers coming out, but it wasn't as clear, and I wanted you to really see him. And then even in the fun, for the sort of younger, fun people, they did it in looking a little less realistic and a little more cartoon-like. And even if you wanted some beautiful slippers, you could do that in the spots. And then we took those spots and went over into dots, which was surprising. Again, these are sort of, for me, some things I'm expecting to see and looking for, and others kind of surprised me. But the spots and the dots were really continuing, but I love the fact that they were in all different kinds of permutations. So one of the things we talk about is how cool booth display is. That's a booth. So what they're selling is these very simple pots, but they did this whole dotted display to show it. This is all cut velvet in this tiny, dense dot. This is porcelain with these lines of dots. These are sort of splotched, where these have that sense of almost being Japanese, almost like a kimono print, really densely screened, blurred and bleeding, or in kind of an organic stripe. But we saw them in all kinds of permutations. And then from dots we went to stripes. We've been seeing a lot of monochrome colors in stripes, and now we're starting to see a lot more multicolor. I love the one that's in part of the new Robert Allen collection that's just coming out now, that Epicurean, that first one over there that has that level of all those vegetal greens in it, is a really beautiful multicolor stripe, the first one on the left over there. But there are a lot of really beautiful multi-kinds of stripes. So you can do them in a one-tonal family of color, but we definitely saw a lot more in mixing. This is a lighting piece. And then Weaver's Delight, we continue to talk about the fact that lots more people are doing jacquards than prints. There were sort of this period where we took things down and took stuff out of excuse me, took stuff out of product in order to keep a price point, make our margins, but we're seeing a lot more factories reopened that do jacquards and these tiny little micro jacquards, which really take skill. And so this again speaks to the craftsmanship of weaving and how important it is that we keep these kinds of factories open, and how beautiful all these products are in these tiny little geos. And then we went graphic on the other side, where these, I think, again, have a very Nordic feel to them. And so, and a lot more knitting. Remember I was talking about knitting coming through? All this and all of these are knitted, and then these are all woven. And it's the whole idea of sort of this really graphic approach to a new kind of check or square that is coming through. And then these interesting color combinations, very interesting color combinations. And then very touching, sort of this sense of, we've been talking about experiential engagement for the consumer, and if you think about it, we look at so much stuff on a screen where all of this feels the same if we rub our hand over it, right? But it's not. And so some of them really have this wonderful tactile touch and this engagement to the consumer. This is one of the ways you're going to draw people in. If you own retail, how you're going to draw them in to engage with a product. If you create a product, how you're going to draw people in to engage with them. It's this sense of touch, this sense of texture. And so all of these, I don't know if you can see this one very well, but this is scored in leather with a pebbly grain. This is all carved in wood and then stained. This is ceramic, but it has almost an elephant skin to each of those ripples. This is leather that's all stitched. Isn't that amazing? That's a vase. This is, look at the high and low on that carpet. Those are my feet. So that's a carpet that is all cut that way. That's a tremendous amount of work. That's skill. That's really high-end craftsmanship. This one cabinet that has four different finishes on it, and one of them all carved, and worked as well. And then another piece of metal is encasing all of that. This is how they've off-centered the doors on the door to give you another sense of engagement. And this is a mirror that has both a high and a low and is mixing that copper with the blue. So just think about when you're working on product, how you can further engage your customer by that sense of tactile engagement. And now we're just going to go through very quickly. Most people don't realize when you haven't been to the show that it's not just about the product that you're seeing, but it's the way the show looks as you move through all of those 8 halls. And so I've just picked out a few of my favorite displays. This is one from a German towel manufacturer. This is a new one for him this year. The last few years, he's had 6 or 8 full-size washing machines with a full-size mannequin perched on it in the color robe, and her head wrapped with a towel, and her shoes in her bag, and a stack of towels next to it to showcase their colors. And this year they went to bathtubs and neon lighting, and I thought that was really great. But nobody here in the States would show their towels this way. You'd go by and see a stack of towels, right? This is much more interesting, right? This is another one. This was over in Hall 6, but just the whole idea of how that this is a textile brand, but just the whole idea of how they created that undulating outside piece that just lets you see in a little bit. It makes you kind of want to go in and check that out. But it's the whole idea of thinking about how display can engage again on a deeper level. This one in the inspiration space, where again, tropical and jungle and all of that is important. So they did all of this work for all of that. That's not for sale. That's just about engaging us and making us want to come in. You can come in and rest, you can come in and meet, you can come in and be inspired, but it's this whole idea of the way that it is. Look at these from Vista Alegre. Isn't that gorgeous, the big bird cage? This is to showcase Christian Lacroix's new collection, which I was telling you was birds and butterflies. And so those birds and butterflies are all encaptured in that beautiful bird cage. Wow. And last but not least, I can't believe this came on my favorite one. I'm going to kill it. But look at this. These are full-size chandeliers that look like they've been hung on white balloons. Are those not the most? These stopped more people in their tracks than I can tell you. And I was just talking with Alyssa about it. The amount of times this was Instagrammed. There's your showroom. This is sort of the ultimate wrap-up of the showroom of how your customer is going to do some work for you, is going to put you out there in the world, because this is really extraordinary. Oh, don't do it. We'll maybe we should. Hold on one second. We're going to get that away. I have no idea why it's trying to connect. Oh, it went. Okay. We only have a few more. Oh, it came back. Oh, jeez. It's bad. I'm sorry. Yeah, when it goes away and then it's there. They just take it off the screen. Okay. You can slide this. If you slide this down, you can get all the way to the bottom. No, you can grab that. Yeah. You don't have to look at all of them. So. Keep going. Keep going. Oh, it's still loading. We're almost done. I apologize for our technical. Please stand by. How many of y'all remember that? Doesn't even say that anymore. Keep going.
We get to review them.
Okay, now, there. From her, yeah, perfect. There it is. So isn't that extraordinary?
Yeah.
Don't you kind of just want to be there? It was one of those words, like, this was my favorite piece. But this sort of describes better than anything could in terms of just what people spend time and energy on to engage you when you come to this show. And that's one of the things that I think makes it just so special. So the last couple of things are, we have a designer of the year every year. This year it was Cecily Mens. She's a Danish designer. She's been decorated by the King and Queen of Denmark for her design work, but she's a very clean, very minimalist designer. This bag is this bag, just as a note. But she does very, very cool, very just sort of simple, clean, minimalist design. And then I had to add this because people always sort of say, one of the other things that's wonderful is you meet the most amazing people in the aisles at the show. So here's Tom Dixon giving a talk on his design work in China in our conference space. That's Nendo, one of my huge design crushes, one of the best designers I think in the world, a Japanese designer that was there with a project that he was doing where he had 5 different brands that he had designed for. This is Mrs. Missoni, one of my huge design crushes. Our 6 designers of the year, our 6 young designers, were all from Italy this year, and they all had mentors who recommended them. So Mrs. Missoni recommended one, and Rossano Orlandi, who is another one of my big design crushes, recommended the other. And that's Philippe Rocard, who is the director of Maison Objet in Paris. And so just the whole idea is that you're not just coming for the show itself for product and just, to see what's new and what's next in that way, but you really are engaged as a whole creative person on so many levels when you come to the show. So thank you so much for your time. Let me know if you have any questions.